March. I call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order. Our meeting is being recorded and is available on Zoom. We do not have any members on Zoom today. All right, are there any citizen requests to address the Finance Committee to start? I don't see anyone either. Okay, perfect. Approval of minutes of prior minutes. I don't think we have any for this meeting. We'll have some for the next meeting. I did send you the revised February 7th.
Yep.
And I have 2 sets that I received from Catherine that I'm gonna look at. And we will be caught up hopefully by the week after that. All right, so now we have a presentation. Thank you for coming. We have Ron and Heidi.
Good evening.
We did all receive the policy.
Yes,
So you know, okay.
orders. Good evening. My name is Heidi Pratt. I'm the clerk of the select board and co-chair of HONE. My other co-chair, Natasha Espada, was supposed to join us, but something came up for her, so she's not going to be able to join us. But we have Ron Ruth here with us, a member of the HONE committee, and I understand an alum. So
A
very-
favorite alum.
A favorite alum. Well,
There's a generous.
And I think he went to the planning board, right?
he's kind of a favorite everywhere he goes.
And
so.
that's where kind of things went a little.
Oh, no, that's for good news.
Always come back
Yeah,
on.
And the CPA as well. Remember?
Memorial Park's the only one you don't have.
We'll get on that.
A lot of history here. So we are here tonight to talk to you about the HONE committee and the work that we've done to work on implementing the MBTA Communities Act in Needham. And I guess I'm just going to give you a basic presentation. I do want you to understand, as I mentioned to the chair, that we do not have our final maps available and we do not have our fiscal impact analysis available. And that's because we've spent a great deal of time on public engagement, and that has really been upfront in our process, and it's pushed our timeline a little bit further back for map creation, and those are the maps upon which the fiscal analysis is based, and so that is why we're sort of coming to the end of our process, and I'm going to go through the timeline, but I just want to start by making sure that everyone understands what the MBTA Communities Act is. This is a law in the state of Massachusetts that requires that all MBTA communities, those that are served by MBTA services in one form or another, and those communities that are adjacent to those communities, provide zoning for additional housing with multifamily housing available by right. So I'm just going to go through these really quickly. This law can be fairly confusing, and it has a lot of quirks and rabbit holes, but these are the basics. They must provide for at least one district of reasonable size in which multifamily housing is permitted as of right without a trip to the planning board for a special permit. They can't be age restricted, and they have to be reasonable and suitable for families with children.
When you say as of right, is that, and so usually you'd have to go to the zoning board of appeals.
The zoning board of appeals is a process
comprehensive.
after.
But so that is eliminating that also.
Well, can I interject?
Please do.
I'm sorry.
That's why you're here, Ron.
When you say comprehensive permit, that sounds like 40B.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and this is divorced from 40B. And so, yes, if you need them to get a special permit, you often go to the planning board. There are some situations in Needham where you would go to the zoning board of appeals for a special permit.
Right.
And then 40B is its own separate animal. And we're effectively unconnected to that.
Okay,
Yeah.
but you still have to go to the planning board, even if it's as of right, right?
No, you go to the
But not-
building inspector.
Oh, so you don't have to get approval not required?
You just.
Right, that's a
Building
subdivision
permit.
concept, yeah.
Okay, great.
And,
But you bring up a good point, and if I can,
Write
I'd
that
just like to
down.
interject.
Yeah,
The MBTA
Don't
Communities
build up
Act is
the-
not about affordable housing. So it's an understandable thing that people conflate. there are many tools that the state is using to get at housing. This is about addressing supply. But it's not about producing affordable housing. So this is gonna produce market rate housing, and there may be an affordability component, inclusionary zoning, a percentage that Hone recommends to the planning board for eventual passage with the bill, with the article rather. But this is really just about producing more housing in Needham and all of these communities.
Right, just.
Please, yeah.
Small footnote, because one. To distinguish, we were talking, Jim's question was in terms of going to the planning board. We're developing, I suppose is the simplest way to put it, what the construct and structure will be for what's called site plan review. That's less than a special permit. And it's possible that that process will end up with a trip at the planning board, but not for a special permit, for site plan review, which is a very circumscribed review of the project and does not ultimately have discretion to say no. It can put conditions on, like keep your stormwater on your site. Don't put a driveway at the middle of the intersection at a corner, things like that, but it's not anywhere near as comprehensive as special permit. So just to distinguish, there could still be a trip to the planning board, but on very limited basis. Sorry.
Well, so we have to use at least 15 dwelling units per acre as our minimum gross density. A portion of the district must be located within 5.5 miles from a commuter station. And I will say that for Needham, that's 90% of our adjusted zoning has to be within that district. And we must comply by December 31st of this year. So you can see the Needham specific requirements, the gross acreage is 50 acres, our unit capacity, we are looking to add, and remember, this is potential units, this is zoning. So if you pretend that nothing exists there, we have to zone to allow 1,784 units by right.
Does a unit have a defined, what is it? What is a unit?
Yeah, so for the compliance model, and this is how it works, we decide what we would like to see, and then we run it through the state's compliance model. The compliance model takes into account many factors, but not all factors, and uses a 1,000 square foot unit as its compliance factor. So ultimately, whatever is actually produced will be determined by the market. You know, a developer will come in and say, well, I think I can sell all studios, or, you know, a mix of all different bedroom types.
It isn't really though, because this is directed at apartments / condos. So it's not that you can put in townhouses
Yeah.
and squish together.
Yeah, you can.
You can.
Absolutely. You can build all kinds of housing. We're not.
But with the 15 dwelling units per acre, that would be challenging, right?
Oh, no,
No.
actually, you'd be surprised at what 15 dwelling units per acre looks like. It does look like townhomes.
Does it?
In fact, it can look like a cottage court. I don't know if you're familiar with the one up on West Street. That's actually about 15 units per acre. Because it depends on, not all of these parcels are an acre. So when you average it out, it's a very complicated math problem that I'm not gonna pretend I understand, but I'm telling you that the compliance model shows this.
And it might be helpful to mention that the density numbers are an allowance. So builders have an option if they think it's preferable to go less dense.
So how does the 1784 number, where did that come from?
That is 15%, I believe, of
It's
Needham's
from the state.
current housing quantity. And that's based on us being a commuter rail community.
So we have to provide 15% more units?
We have
Mhm.
just the zoning
The
to
zoning
allow
for
for
it.
it.
This is not a housing production act. This is a zoning act. So I want to make that really clear. What that means is that when we look at a map, we pretend there's nothing there. We understand that there are things there. We pretend that there's nothing there and put in place zoning. What the zoning would allow is what this is talking about.
Okay, so I think it would be helpful to have that as a bullet, but that's where the 1784 comes from. Because otherwise, all you have there is 15 dwelling units per acre and 50 acres, which is substantially less than 1784.
These are the requirements. This is not how we're implementing it. This is just what they
Well, right, but I
require.
think it'd be helpful to have a bullet to explain that requirement,
Okay,
where the 1784 comes from.
all right. So in addition, we need to, meet this dwelling units per acre of, 15 units. And the percentage, as I mentioned before, the percentage of the area that needs to be located within half mile of the station area is 90% of that, acreage.
So are you able to tell town meeting, yeah, if pick one of our areas, whether it's Hershey or whether it's the Heights or Junction or wherever, and are you able to say what or how many units could possibly, whether they are developed is not important, but that could be developed pursuant to this new?
Once our map is finalized and we've done those counts, yes, we hope to. So what we hope to be able to tell them, and we don't have it yet because the maps are not finalized, is how many dwellings exist in a particular district currently, how many the zoning would allow, and what the net new units number is. So when you look at a district and you say, okay, we're gonna put X number of units here, and you think, well, all of those new units on top of what they already exist, oh my God, that's so many. But it doesn't account for the existing. I mean,
So
most
you
of
get
the
credit for the
land.
existing? Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, you don't get credit for the existing because you're only looking at the zoning. Like, it doesn't matter what's existing. But we would like to be able to tell people so that they can understand, well, there's 20 units there now, we have to add 40, but that means only 20 new units, things like that.
Or zone for 40, you gotta be careful. I know, and I,
Yeah,
Just-
it's a habit we have to get into
Yeah.
in talking about potential
Right.
zone.
Well, I know, but I think potential to me is great, but I think if the potential comes to reality, I think we'd like to have some sense of what that would mean.
no, and I
Yeah,
think
and
that's,
that's what I'm saying,
that's what-
we're gonna be providing that. Not only that,
And
but our,
that people, this is gonna be on the warrant, right?
not this one,
not this,
Oh,
yeah,
this is
we're
all
going to October.
October.
But
This
now
is
we
just
have,
an update.
it's
Got
an
it.
update, which is
Yeah.
required, I think, of the charge to the home committee.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but I mean, that's something we would wanna do anyway.
yeah.
No gun to our head.
Anyway, so, let's, move on to the next slide. So the home committee is, a function of the select board and the planning board. And you can see all these members. And of course, Josh is a member who doesn't fall into either of those categories. But we have members, who were, appointed by those two boards.
I think technically I was appointed by the select board, but with the, advice of the finance committee.
Oh.
We all took a step back and Josh was elected.
You want-
And so our charge is basically to lead broad public engagement, try to get everybody involved and understanding what this act means for Needham, for the state. Utilize the recommendations of the housing plan as a starting point, the 2022 housing plan. We're going to be evaluating the build out projections, analysis of fiscal school enrollment and infrastructure impacts. That will be available in the coming weeks. Our third and final public meeting on our maps and process is planned for March 28th, and all of that information will be available by then. We are also considering zoning elements that are not allowed under the MBTA Communities Act. So, for example, all of the areas that are included in the map need to be of a certain size. They need to be at least 5 acres large. And in many cases, there's an element of contiguity that we have to provide, meaning that the parcels actually physically touch each other. So where you can't provide an area that is at least 5 acres, you can't include that in your compliance map. However, there have definitely been areas that the committee has decided would be appropriate to rezone, to include in our map. It's just not something that we can do under the charge. And so we are making a very long and comprehensive list that we will be submitting to the planning board following the submission of our map to the state so that they can begin work on those zoning changes. Although I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that that's not gonna happen at the same time as our articles will come to October town meeting. But a
But
lot,
that's step two, right?
that's, yes, absolutely. And those are recommendations. The planning board will do with them what they will. So keeping everybody updated, and then we're gonna be providing draft zoning and maps to the select board, the planning board, finance committee, but specifically to the planning board to submit that have been approved by DHCD, now called the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, so that we can bring them to town meeting and know that they're compliant.
So basically, my understanding then is that this is a long-term overlay that doesn't take into consideration personal property or real estate ownership or anything like that. It's just from a standpoint of what is today. It's just that you're changing the zoning within a certain area that will allow over time these changes to happen.
Correct.
Yes,
Under proper,
yes,
you know, private and whatever.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we are not in
Yeah.
charge of what people do with their.
No, that's right, that's right.
So,
That's important for people to understand,
mhm,
I think.
absolutely.
And just as a footnote on that, there is a tiny bit of recognition of limitation of property ownership. So for instance, municipally owned properties or state-owned properties, governmental owned properties can be included within the maps. But in terms of getting to the number of 1,784 units, anything that could be built there is not counted.
Mhm.
So a town couldn't say, for instance, and have a golf course, say, we're going to designate the entire golf course and we're done. Because you could get 1,784 units there. Is that the state would say 0 of those count, at least assuming that the town owns the entire golf course, which is a separate.
And what is the rationale for that? Because they don't think there's no control
Well,
for the town to then
no,
contribute that and develop it, or?
yeah, because there's no, from the state's perspective, their, one of their goals is housing production. That housing will be, developed. And let's say Needham did that with the golf course, but then turned around and said, we're totally happy keeping the golf course for the next 50 years. Then you've got in the effect of the legislation because nothing is going to be built. But yet you've dotted an I and crossed the T.
Same with this building, for example.
True.
Sure.
Yeah,
Like a
probably.
library, or, I mean, you know, any number of like choice.
Even though
apartments,
this would
frankly.
be in the district because it's,
Right.
Can it get apartments to the top of it?
But then doesn't it make it, I'm sorry. Doesn't it make it then de facto a housing production act? Because,
No, because a lot of, actually, in Needham, along the path that we've planned out, everything is developed. And it's a question of those private property owners deciding that they want to turn their property over and change it. Many of them are very happy just the way things are. A lot of the parcels are quite small and it would need to be consolidated before the economics would really work out for redevelopment. So, it's not a housing production act because we're just putting the rules in place to allow for these things, but it's a private choice about whether or not anything actually happens.
And apart from that, I would think that other rules that everybody needs to play with, such as wetlands and conservation area, those are still in play. Those are still there.
Well, they're still there, yeah, and they're not eligible to be included in the map anyway, so.
I mean, you could also cite the example, like we rezoned the center of Needham to allow for, a lot of things, none of which has happened, right? I mean,
Exactly.
And,
Zoning is an encouragement or an incentive in theory can be an incentive on the part of the town to get people to build certain things in certain places. And changing it is doing the same thing.
So let me ask you this then, I agree with you, but is there anything being done to sort of actually encourage it to be built by the way you're zoning? And then you take, for example, I go back to Muzzy and I drive by it every night and it frustrates me
Yeah.
enormously so are you doing this in mind of what actually we want this to happen? And so we're doing some things differently or otherwise so that it will happen? Or is it sort of just a theoretical where we're meeting the requirements and then, 50 years from now, it's all gonna still look the same? So what type of thinking of, if any of that, and I expect there is, are you guys doing and what you're coming up with?
Well, I think that the home committee has been very thoughtful and very understanding of this idea that economic development and housing development is something that Needham needs. It is a law imposed by the state, but we, did a 2007 housing plan and a 2021 housing plan, both of which highlighted that our housing is deficient. It is not only unvaried, but also there's just not enough of it. And it causes difficulty for the people who live here and the people who would like to live here. So I think that I can rightly characterize the attitude of the entire committee as trying to make this work for Needham. And what that means is trying to put in place conditions that are positive for housing development, but also appropriate to the area in which we are talking about zoning. So we went through our map very carefully, district by district, looking at the conditions in each district to try and make something, conditions that would be appropriate for that area and for that neighborhood. And to make sure that they had the amenities that would create a neighborhood and that there was everything was in walking distance, obviously to the transit, but also to stores and the grocery store, because those are the conditions that make for a good neighborhood. So yes, we did try to put in place some buildability. We consulted with the Council of Economic Advisors and a group of developers called together by the chamber to talk about what kind of conditions would be, where the threshold was for buildability, for actual production, so that we could put in place rules that made sense, that would encourage development. But we're also very mindful of the folks who live there already in these areas and what would be palatable to them and to the rest of Needham, because of course, all of these things have an impact on the rest of Needham as well. So I think we did that in a very thoughtful way, and then worked to protect those areas where we thought development was most likely.
And we'll be able to test that when you produce the maps to us, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know how you'll test it, but
Well,
we can certainly see it.
no, I'll either agree with you or not agree with you,
Yeah.
but I can't do that until I get the maps.
Yes, that's true.
But ultimately, economics is what drives it. It's the economics, whether it makes sense economically and financially for someone to do this, and that's, you can't control that I mean, unless you want to subsidize it, which obviously I don't think.
But is that, I mean, and this isn't really the topic of tonight's discussion, but is that kind of MBTA community space too? Because as you pointed out, it doesn't, I think Needham has done a pretty good job actually of producing affordable housing kind of in excess of the affordable with the market rate affordable housing, in excess of what is required. So
This isn't affordable.
I know, I understand that, but it will eventually be, right? Because right now it's a production act, but the affordability percentages, there's gonna be some required affordability percentage, I would think, or test going forward as part of this.
We are the plan currently is to institute an affordable inclusionary zoning But as part of the MBTA community, that is actually not necessary. You do not have to include any. And I just wanna, just because we've all been doing it, but you said that this is a housing production act. This is not a housing production, act. This is a zoning act. And I just wanna make that, I've made the same error, but I just wanna like clarify. There's nothing about any of this that requires that we produce any housing. It is simply about making.
Madam
it
Chair.
possible. Yes.
I have a couple of comments. So I think my objection to all this, is I don't like the state telling us what to do. I think I would have been happier if home was Needham born and bred. And you had your committee of Needham constituents and citizens, and you came up and you said, we believe we need to create more housing stock for the varying aspects of our community. And based on our study, would have had a consultant help you. Here are some of the areas that we think that, you know, we could have these opportunities. Here's some of the density that we think makes sense. Here's why we think these are good places for this, to build up housing stock in these areas because of the factors you've mentioned. And instead, the state doesn't know Needham, and they simply have one set of rules, and they just apply across the board without really taking into consideration, you know, whatever our particular interests or wants might be. The second point I would make is that, you know, if we as a town wanted to increase housing stock, which I think is a very noble thing to do. And if we then thought one way to encourage that is to do this zoning, we could have done that. I think we could have done that. I don't think we needed the state to give us their arbitrary, and I consider capricious rules as to how to do it. I do agree on the unknown, and, you know, maybe I'll be convinced when I see the maps that this isn't gonna be the possibility of, you know, overcrowding. But I know that's gonna take time for you guys to work on. And, you know, another concern that has been echoed by other communities is what this is doing, again, is it's singling out particular areas instead of potentially looking at other areas within the town. And why is it that it's just these areas and they attach it to this commuter rail? Why is it that those are the only good places where better zone would be, you know, preferred as opposed to other areas? And we're not being given that chance because this is only a you know, commuter rail, MBTA, or whatever it's called, initiative. I would agree with you on the economics, Barry, but I'd make two comments about that. One is, when we looked at what we were trying to do a number of years ago in the downtown area, there was a great debate at town meeting. By the way, it didn't pass by much. I forget exactly what the vote was, but there was a lot of discussion back and forth on what we should do. And it seemed to me that the idea was good, but as you say, no one thought it was good enough to invest money into it. Now you look at 40B, and I understand these are different constructs and different concepts. But the reason a place like Charles River Landing succeeded is because they were able to, you know, avoid the 20% on revenue, and they made Cabot Forbes made millions of dollars, well beyond what the cap was supposed to be under affordable housing. So that's why the economics work there.
But the density is different than what is allowed downtown.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's a really different model. But anyway,
Well, I think but anyway, those are my thoughts and comments, but I have an open mind, and I do, I was here in town meeting when we debated whether we were going to allow the footprint change on single family housing. And, I was in favor of limiting it in terms of these McMansions, and it failed. It failed by town meeting. It didn't fail by a lot. I'm gonna say it could have been maybe 10, 15 votes. It was really very, very close. But there was an opportunity for the town to kind of keep some of our housing stock that was different. And that went by the boards. So in any event, I have an open mind and happy to consider it as more information comes out. Thanks, Madam Chair.
I have one question, and can you or maybe it's a statement, the other committee in town that's also working on housing, and I forget their acronym.
Needham Housing Coalition.
Needham Powers and
Private
Coalition.
advocacy group.
I'm sorry?
It's a private advocacy group.
Yeah, but it's confusing
Hmm.
for citizens and it's confusing for your initiative, I think. And I'm wondering, you know, do you work with them? Do they have a voice in Hone, or how is that?
They don't
Is
have a
there-
representative on home. We communicate with them, they bring comments and they have a lot of, very relevant expertise. That makes comments nearly every meeting. Very comprehensive, maps and so on, and when the ideas are solid ones, we definitely listen to them, yeah. But we're not connected. I mean, we're the town, they're the citizenry.
And I guess to town meeting members and to the citizens that don't necessarily understand that, are you going to
Well,
try to
yeah, I mean, the plan is,
make that point?
it's not, I mean, personally, to me, it's not so important that people understand that we're two separate groups. What is important is that they understand what we're proposing as a plan. So once we turn our plan over to the state, for compliance check, my plan is to start meeting, with all of the town meeting members by district and to explain the plan and to explain what went into it and let them ask questions and so on. And frankly, anyone else who wants to meet, to continue education. And I think in those meetings, it will be clear, that I am from town and own, and that's what we're presenting.
I agree with Carol, but I'd also have a cautionary tale. I believe that these town appointed committees are the ones that need to govern, not these private groups that clearly have a motivation, a bias, or an agenda. Whether it's a good one or a bad one, I don't know. I'm not making a comment one way or the other. But we need to make sure the town is run by the town.
Of course, that's.
Yeah, and I
It's say
guess
of
that,
course, but it doesn't always happen that way.
I guess that was my point, because, I mean, I know it's early days, but I've been surprised in my conversations with other town meeting members that I think are reasonably informed. They are very confused on that
Good
point.
to know.
Okay, well, it is good to
So-
know. We'll do what we can do to clear that up. But everyone in town has a voice. We get comments from residents at every single meeting expressing their comments, and it wouldn't make any sense to limit the commentary from this group.
Yeah.
So we take
I'm not
kind of all
suggesting that.
comments.
One,
I'm suggesting that you guys should run your committee as you deem fit.
Yeah.
Take comments from everybody, but you're the one that represents the interests of the boards that have been appointed to this.
No, Heidi and Tasha have done a really good job co-chairing the committee.
Thank you.
and I think as we approach town meeting in the fall, seems like a long time from now, at least on this. The moving party will actually be the planning board.
Mhm.
And so that may help clarify,
Mhm.
because the planning board, all of this is all eventually to be delivered to the planning board. They will then hold their own public hearing process. And when coming to town meeting, they presumably will be the moving party, maybe joined by the select, but it will come in as a planning board. And so that may help clarify that point. It is the town moving. It won't be home, it will be them, the planning board, so that may help.
Yes.
Heidi, Ron, can you talk a little bit about the fiscal impact statement? How it's gonna be done, when it's gonna be done, and sort of, will we get a breakout of, if you have 1784 units, you know, what the potential tax, real estate tax income would be from those versus what the potential expenses would be the schools, police, fire, utilities, and those types of things. And when you do that, are they gonna be sort of be based in 2024 dollars, or are you doing will you have an inflation factor, or just kind of give me a preview of what you're gonna be doing there and what we should expect to see and when we will see it?
Sure. Well, if you look up at the screen, you can see that our timeline is there. So I'm gonna go through that and part of that is gonna be the answer to your question. So I just want to stress for everyone that, as I mentioned before, this process didn't just start with the home committee. There was a 2007 housing plan that stressed that Needham had a deficit of housing. There was a 2021 housing plan that also stressed the same thing and detailed, you know, beyond the lack of housing, just the unaffordability of housing. That at that time, the median house price was 1.3 million, you know, that it had just become a very unaffordable community. Can you just go back one slide? Thanks, Steve. I just want to talk a little bit about what the process has been so far, just so you understand where we came from. We launched in early September and really tried to make community engagement the sort of centerpiece of this project. We had our first community meeting on November 9th, and before that time, we mailed postcards to the residents of every Needham resident, or every Needham household, I should say. We advertised not only in the News You Needham, but the Needham Local, the Needham Channel, the Observer. There's a special, help me out here, flash messaging, the listserv from the town. We prevailed upon many community groups to include in their newsletter news about this forum, and we had over 300 attendees at our first forum, which is frankly, I think, pretty incredible.
Out
People,
of how many mailings? So in other words, how you said you sent out postcards, and how?
So what's that,
there's
11,000?
11,000.
homes, right?
Yeah. homes,
So
yeah.
300 out of 12,000.
Yeah, but keep in mind that typical Needham forums are like,
If I may.
I mean, if you get 35 people,
People don't
you're doing
come.
pretty well. And this was really like an actual record breaking turnout for a Needham forum. There have been some that have exceeded, 100, but for the most part, we haven't seen that kind of attendance at anything like that. There were attendees in person and online. And we used, a number of different mechanisms to try and educate and allow people to give their feedback. We had a number of stations set up around the room that would allow people to indicate their preference as far as the different levers that we can use as we talk about the different zoning mechanisms. So people had little stickies that they could put on the board to indicate their preferences. And we had a great presentation given by our two consultants. And came away with a lot of positive feedback. For our second community engagement workshop, we presented 3 scenarios. The intention was to get people talking. The intention was to have daylight between these versions of the map to give people something to react to. So react they did. It was a great session with tons of feedback. There was a little survey that was filled out everyone sort of did it at the same time, and then we're also able to keep it and do it at their leisure. And they were able to discuss the different mechanisms for changing the density, for example. And there was also public comment. So folks could just line up at the microphone and discuss their hopes and their fears and their thoughts in general. And then we also took written feedback and incorporated all of that into a giant document that the committee read afterwards. And also compiled a lot of that information into FAQs that are posted on our website.
And this map was the greatest geographic extent that we presented.
Yes, this was our C, which was the biggest of the 3 maps. And again, they were created, all three maps were compliant, but they were created to stimulate conversation, and they did that. So, the next community workshop is coming up on March 28th. It's gonna be here in Powers Hall, at 7 PM. Actually, he wants to join us, and we would love it if you guys would join as well. Included in that workshop will be, our proposal for the map. And our strategy for town meeting is to bring two maps, two articles, two separate articles with a base compliance map and then a larger neighborhood housing map. That would be, so there is paper compliance, and then there is trying to facilitate housing production. Those are the two choices. For that workshop, we will have those maps and all the zoning parameters for each map. We will have likely build out estimates. Our consultant has what they call a propensity for change model. So certainly we'll see what exists, and we will see the potential zoning available and how many units that could potentially create. But we'll also see, based on their experience, what the consultants agree is the likelihood of build out. In addition, we'll have the fiscal impacts, including school enrollment, tax revenue, infrastructure, operating and capital expenses for the town departments, including some input from each town department about what they feel the impact will be on them.
So that'll be March 28th.
Yeah. We will have the economic feasibility analysis for inclusionary zoning. And we'll also have some visualizations, some drawings, 3D drawings, well, 2D drawings, but you get the point, of select sites to illustrate sort of what this could look like. So that people have an easier time envisioning what the change could be. Any questions on that? I know that we sort of got to your.
Yeah, so
question.
my point is, so if they identify that they're through 1784 units, I'll just use that as a number, because that's what you presented us with. It could create 500 new students to the Needham Public Schools. Will there also be something of what it will cost us to find space that we don't have for those 500 students, or will they just say it's 500, potentially 500 students?
I think it'll probably say it'll be potentially 500 students, and then we'll hear from the school department and ask them what would be the impact of having 500 potential new students, and what would the impact be? I will just point out, I mean, we know already that we have these giant school infrastructure projects coming up, and while it is true that potentially that could impact school enrollment, we also know that it could potentially impact the share of tax that everyone needs to pay into a project like that. So, I mean, it's, they're not gonna be, our consultants are not gonna be looking at every blip down the road all through our intended timeline, but they will be giving us more information.
All right, so I'm looking forward to reading it, because at least from where I'm concerned, that's one of the most important things of this whole thing.
Yeah.
Is what is gonna cost us, for the build out and understanding, what the projected tax revenue, to your point, what that is, but also what the impact is gonna be, and I expect there could be a delta, because the tax impact is one thing, but if you have to create more space in schools, the structures that are proposed to be built now are basically not that we're increasing the student, we're dealing with what we have and refurbishing our existing school infrastructure. But if we have to find room for 500 more students, there's a price, on that goes above just what the real estate tax that comes in on an
Sure.
incremental basis. And so I look forward to that, because for me, that's gonna be one of the most important things to this.
I think there's, certainly there's been some analysis to date, and we don't have a completed picture yet, but it is, the development is cash positive, and cash positive, even including and anticipating capital outlays associated with it. So as a bottom line to carry, and I mean, I know that's not a number to carry away tonight, but it is a cash positive endeavor. So in terms of will the town be quote unquote short on money? I think we can say that already we know that that will not be the case.
Well, depending upon what you consider to be the expenses.
Yeah,
Understood.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, we've just built the Sunita School. Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is not
Which is full.
unimaginable.
Right,
No, I understand, but, and certainly I don't want to get ahead of myself, but because we don't have the numbers with us today, but I think just in terms of a takeaway, please, that it's not going to be revenue negative, even including capital outlays.
And I think so the consultants did a fiscal impact analysis based upon a previous model, so not the exact ones that are going to be presented. And that was focused on the operating,
Understood, understood,
Not
but
capital.
not capital.
no, understood,
Yeah.
but if you analyze the positive that arose from that analysis, dollars are dollars, and those positive dollars, when then applied to a capital, gives a lot of room for future capital.
And are these the consultants that are you working with respect to implementation of this?
Yes.
So they, I'm sure, are very interested in this type of zoning,
This is their expertise.
but it's also what they want to see. In other words,
Right.
Oh, result oriented?
well, I
don't-
think,
we haven't
I would
found
think
that.
we have to have a heavy dose of skepticism.
The FinCom, I'm sure will review it in detail.
And can we have a copy of the scope of what you've asked them to do?
It's not something that I have, but I can check into what was sent out to them.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
If we could see what they were asked to do, that'd be helpful.
So, from our third community meeting on the 28th, we will work to finalize our recommendations and conclude our work. There is a proposed meeting of all of the boards, the planning, select, and finance committee, on April 30th. Following that meeting, we will turn these maps over to the state to check compliance. Compliance review is 90 days long. So we'll get it back just before we swing into fall. The completed and approved articles will go to the planning board, where they will hold their normal process, review public hearings, and then bring those articles to town meeting in October. And then we will turn them over to the state again for a final review and hopefully be judged in compliance. Following that, as I said before, the planning board will have received a transmission from the home committee recommending a whole lot of stuff. And they will take that at their pace. We won't have control over that, so. So that's the whole shebang. I know there's been questions throughout, but who has questions now?
Other questions or comments from the community? Yeah, I think I look forward to the documents on March 28th.
How are we?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks very much, Ron. Great to see you.
Great to see you.
Everything well?
Yeah.
Good.
Primary issue. right?
Yeah, I agree.
So the next item might take us a little bit longer than 15 minutes. Looking at our fiscal year 2025 budget. So I'm gonna just look at DPW first. Dave and I asked Dave to go through. And make sure that our numbers agree. Um, and so there were some small adjustments that were made. One was when I subtracted the 100,000 out of the town manager's expense line for public works, which should be, is it a warrant article?
In the special.
In the special, it'll be a warrant article in the special. It turned out that the town manager's budget was 20K overstated, so ours is 20K overstated, so it needs to be reduced by $20,000. I have no idea when I put 325 of expenses in budget, that should have been in expenses, but somehow I did. Must have just read the DSR4 number somewhere. And then the last adjustment was an adjustment, town manager's budget had 424 for snow and ice, which was adjusted to 441, and Dave let me know that the reason the town manager's budget was low was because the increase or the amount had been included in capital instead, and so we removed that from capital. So these are really just cleanup items on the public works budget. It did, however, free up $20,000. And so next, I wanted to talk about finance and technology. So Dave has given us the numbers for what the municipal IT budget is. And it comes out to 1,656,283 plus $248,000 for that 24/7 service for public safety, which was included in a warrant article. So the questions with respect to that budget really have to do with, do we want just a standalone IT budget line? If it is within, under the school department's jurisdiction, while I have it broken down in this spreadsheet, it really would only be a single line item budget. The other question is whether we want the 248 in that line or in the warrant article, because a warrant article is entitled one-time costs, which the 248 are not one-time costs. So should those be in the operating budget, same source of funds? So it wouldn't affect funding at all. So that, and I think the second subsidiary question is if we want a separate IT line, then do we need a number from the school of what their contribution to that municipal school technology line will be that is not fungible with other school funds? That doesn't mean they can't keep other items in their budget. All of their instructional materials, I would assume, would stay in their budget. But if what the town schools need are, let's say, 3 FTEs, director, 2 assistant director, I don't know what they have. So whatever it is that they need, shouldn't those FTEs really be in that separate line?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, and we don't have that information.
Can I add another discussion point?
Sure.
So just separating out the ideas of operationally combining the two
Mhm.
and budgetarily combining the two.
Right.
I think those are not necessarily the same things.
Right, yes. Agreed. But I think operationally, I mean, the way I looked at it was our goal is to have a line that does not simply become subsumed into the school department budget,
Right.
$2 million.
Right.
That is needed for the town technology.
And
And
it's gonna
then
be, and it's gonna be managed.
by the school department, is what we said, that it has to be managed, yeah.
And my concern is really about the fungibility. Like,
Right, that's
these
what-
are just very separate things.
Right.
They are, and we don't want that 248 to go elsewhere, and I mean, it was a large number, it is a large number, $2 million is a lot. So the other thing I did is with that 20K, I did put back that printer for the town manager's office that was not funded. And this is one where it's a small amount of money that would result in huge efficiency for staff and not having to send out every time larger documents need to be printed, and so, and if you all disagree with that, that's fine. But I had put that in there. I think it adds up to $17,200 total in technology.
The cast, the 248,000.
Yeah.
That's just the component from the tax levy.
That's right, but that was the component that originally started in the finance department's budget as a DSR four.
Okay, thank you.
And it was pulled out and put into that warrant.
Thank you for the information.
So,
So remind me, I'm sorry, the IT department is gonna be, but the town is gonna be managed by the schools
yes,
permanently, is that the long
that's
term?
the idea.
We had, this was lengthy.
No, I remember, I just. Okay, thank you. But I personally like the idea of segregating it and making sure that those funds are designated as such and not individual.
So do those school liaisons have a meeting? Do you have anything scheduled with the school department to see what?
Well, I mean, we did discuss this with them,
Yeah,
towards the end of January, I think.
and what were their thoughts regarding the budget, not the
It
operation?
was basically all in the operations.
Yeah,
I raised the idea of separating it out, but I don't know if that was a very robust discussion at the time. It was just an idea.
No, it really wasn't. I don't think they'd really gotten that far, you know, in their planning.
okay.
So what is the downside to segregating out in the way that you have it set?
There is no downside. I think that it would be helpful to not just have the town portion of the joint IT, but to also have the school portion reflected here, because right now all this reflects, I think it's 6.0 FTE and whatever the funds are that are needed for the municipal town side, not the FTEs.
I didn't understand honestly why it's not just a separate department now run by, you know, now managed by the schools, but it's still one consolidated, separate IT department with its own budget.
Yeah,
I agreed with that, except that I thought it should be done by the town side. But that's what I both have believed all along, but you had the superintendent of schools and the town manager saying it's not what they're recommending, it's not what they want to do. And I, out of frustration, I'm not the town manager for the superintendent, so I think it's hard to tell them how to
No, it doesn't,
change
I
their
don't-
policy decision. I mean, if you're going to have a separate line item within schools, which they seem to agree,
Mhm.
the town manager wrote and said they agreed it. But I don't recall if there was a discussion about whether that would include school IT money. I kind of thought it would be collective, but I think what you're telling me is that that has not been agreed to.
we don't have that number, that information.
In other words, what we're showing here for the town side, the salaries, expense and the capital, we don't have those
The school.
equivalent numbers from the school to add to them.
Yes, and I would suggest that we put the 248 into this line and,
So can we just ask them that, if that's what we
Yeah.
want to do?
yeah, I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that that's what,
Mhm.
okay.
And my hope, I mean, from an operational standpoint, this shouldn't interfere with the intention of combining the operations. That there can be a memorandum of
Right.
understanding between the town and the schools to effectuate that.
Mhm.
And that document has yet been to be generated, so.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so then I will do that. What is the deadline for,
You can vote me next week.
I know we can vote next week and then that's it, we're done.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so those were the only two, open items or anything that changed, everything else.
You want to vote on something to do with
Identical.
DPW or not? What-
Yeah, a vote to adopt the new number, which is 37,000 less than what it was previously. That would be
For
helpful.
the 36,967, that's the number you're talking about?
For Public Works, the 21,900,901.
Right, but that's the difference is the 36,967 that I'm looking on the right-hand side.
Yes.
The
No,
numbers aren't adding up.
no, that's the right-hand side is the difference between what the finance committee voted and the town manager voted. So ignore that right-hand side.
It just seemed weird that you said 37,000, and that figure is 37.
Yeah,
So they have nothing to do with each
they
other.
have nothing to do with each
Okay,
other.
I make a motion
Coincidence.
that we revise our former budget recommendation, but changing the line item under total for Public Works to this revised figure of 21,900,901.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion?
Nope.
All in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous. Okay. And then I will, get in touch with the school department then. Okay. And then we will have a final number on the school municipal IT department. Perfect. All right. So next, future debt. So we had, hired a consultant who ghosted us. Was the only consultant to respond and has now ghosted us. We hired him doing future debt, schedule. So I asked Dave to forward to me what he had sent, which are from December of 2022. I started updating the future debt schedules for the debt within the levy to see, you know, there were changes last year at town meeting, then there are changes from fiscal year 2025. All of that is well and good. My question for the committee is, what do you want to see for school scenarios? We had all of these different scenarios that were worked out in those debt schedules. And, you can think about it and, you know, email me.
Well, isn't it the one that they're?
I would pick the one with the voters, right? John?
Yeah, it's the,
Okay, which is,
I don't think.
I don't know.
School project that's,
200 million.
more.
the one that's in the warrant. Okay, so that's what, okay, all right,
But,
But-
just so I can understand. I want to see as much future debt that's being discussed included in there. If you can call it a placeholder A, placeholder B, if you don't want to call it a school, whatever you want. But I think I want the thing fully loaded, because when and if we get to a discussion of the quiet zone, not this initial design money, whatever that may be, the cash thing, the final construction, whatever that number might be. I want to be able to, to analyze it as to what the impact is going to be on the 3% and the 10%. That's what I would like to see.
The big projects that I would like to be included are, I guess, Pollard, which are rough numbers, I think 300 million. Mitchell, rough numbers, 100 million. DPW, I don't know what the cost of that would be. And then we need some sort of time horizon. I think for the schools, we're clear on when Pollard would be, a little less clear on Mitchell with a desire for it to be sooner. And then DPW, it's a big question mark. I have no
So
idea.
part of this will drive them,
Yeah,
right,
right?
once
That's part of the,
once
that's the,
Pollard gets plugged in. So what I'm doing is I'm taking Dave's assumptions on the percent interest rate at 7%. My assumptions aren't always the same on how you're structuring the debt. There are a few that look a little different. That's okay. And I think one of the other assumptions is gonna be that we try to not fund equipment. So we'll show it with equipment funded in 3% and then without equipment funded in 3%.
equipment you're talking about for the schools.
No, I'm talking about that fleet replacement,
Oh,
Fire engine.
fire engines that show up every, how many years and they eat up $500,000 almost
Within the 3%.
within the 3%.
So you're gonna then put it in the 10%?
No, I think we can pay cash for them all.
Oh,
If we use the capital improvement fund as a mechanism to smooth out our
And we're gonna
cash
do it through
capital.
free cash, is that what it is?
Uh-huh. And the capital improvement fund. Yeah,
As long
It
as,
only
as
works
long as there's a
as long
place
as it
for everything.
works.
Well, I know, but I understand, but I just wanna make sure there's a place for everything, that if we're gonna get these fire trucks and these other things, someone's gonna show me that
where
it's
is
in
it?
the plan.
Yeah.
You know, wherever you wanna put it, I don't really care, but wherever it's in the plan, and I feel as though all these other projects. You know, back in the day, when we did this a long time ago, you know, we did have placeholders, and Dave, you were very good about that. And, the placeholder, you know, for 2007 or 8 became, DPW, as John will remember.
Yeah.
Because you were on PPPC at the time. And it was called, whatever it was called, new building or something. We didn't call it DPW, but internally, everyone knew that was. And I think you were within, I could be wrong about this, but I think you were within $500,000 of what you had down there in terms of a potential cost.
Mhm.
It was like 6 million, was probably the cheapest DPW building ever made in the history.
So
of-
so I think that it's reverse engineering the capacity.
Right,
And
right.
putting a number on it.
But what I don't wanna do is I agree with you, Barry, I think will drive the discussion. But I don't want, I wanna make sure that we drive it to the point where they understand that if they really do this, if the town really wants to implement all of these projects moving forward for the next 15 years, here's the impact on your debt schedule, and here's what it's gonna mean with respect to those debt limits. And then they may, as you say, well, we gotta figure out a better way. But let's get to the extreme before we.
Okay. And understand also that our experience tells us that we're always much more optimistic about when we're going to get to projects than we actually
Yeah,
manage to get to them.
we also know that historically Dave is very conservative on, you know, the interest factor for the notes. I think there's a couple other things, I think, in your assumption of revenues, when you compare it, and this is not a negative. You're very protective of the town's dollars, and you never want to be under, because if you're under, then where are you gonna get the money? So I get it, but I'm okay with that. I think that's what a plan should be. And if it turns out that we're actually able to do a little bit more, well, that's a good thing. It's much better than the reverse.
Mhm. Okay. All right, so I will work on that. It's a bear though.
I thought that the one that John, I think, John, you used it last year, right?
Yeah.
I thought that was very helpful at town meeting. You simplified it. So it's a big document, but you simplified it. And, you know, it was made for a very good presentation to town meeting. Here's where we are. Here's what's in the queue. Here's the impact. We have these debt limits. Our AAA rating could be impacted. And I just think it makes a difference. Well, it does to me. Maybe in these days, Needham people don't, maybe they're not as interested. I don't know.
No, I think even if just moving forward with the Pollard is basically gonna freeze out anything else. For a little while. Not forever, just a tiny little bit. Okay. All right,
And then it's important just to have that in black and white so people can understand what that means.
yeah, and as simple as possible. Okay. All right, finance committee updates. I sent you all the climate action committee. Got it? In here. The copy.
For an appointee.
They are looking for someone,
Don't jump at once.
Jim, I think is
No,
great.
oh. I'm coming to see you. Who was that, Sanford and Son that did
Right,
that?
right. The big
Esther.
one, the
so
big one.
the. Yeah, you saw what the membership is.
I thought there was a climate action committee, actually. Isn't there?
That was the plan committee to create the action plan. This would be the committee to enact the plan. Well, and also to create new plans, I suppose.
So I think the role of the finance committee member is obviously to try to understand what financial impact would be of some of the proposals and, maybe bring a little bit of common sense
I'll take one for
to
the
the
team.
discussion. Yeah, just remember, right? We can't actually, us, here in Needham, change climate, right? So long as you go in there, understanding that we're adjusting to climate rather than changing it, I think we'll do good.
Oh, I thought we were gonna beat them alone.
It's going to do it all by itself.
All by itself.
1,700 units and more sun and less CO2. Electrified.
They're all made out of styrofoam.
Headquartered down at the historic district.
All right,
It's okay.
thank you, Barry.
I've been on a
Is
drinking-
everyone,
I've been on
do
a
we have
drinking
consensus
binge
that
for
we're
a
Barry?
while.
Total consensus that Barry's.
Yeah, wonderful appointment.
Oh, my
All
God.
right, thank you, Barry.
Prestigious.
Motion to adjourn.
I do have, two other things.
Yes.
Thank you, Jim.
I withdraw my motion.
Oh,
Update on charter and bylaws, committee, we have met, we are holding on any, timeline for reviewing the charter right now. I think the committee will continue meeting. Right now, we're just looking at bylaw, reviews every, 10 years on years that end in 5, which would mean next year would be the first year for bylaw review committee, review. And basically, it's looking at the bylaws, making sure everything is conformed, that things don't disagree with each other, that we don't have some ancient bylaws on the books that need to be updated. It's not envisioned that this would be substantive, changes to bylaws and replace what committees normally and boards normally do. They would still be responsible for proposing.
Did we do that with the
Bylaws.
fines last year?
Did we?
Yeah, we readjusted all the fines.
Oh, yeah.
Just put on one Josh.
Oh, the one that Josh worked on, which still needs to be adjusted. I think that is exactly what this is for.
I think a
It's to-
lawyer should be on that committee.
Yeah,
I'll sign up for that. Are you needing a volunteer?
yeah, because I'm
Right,
gonna become the town clerk position on this committee, so
Yes, yeah.
finance will need
okay.
another person.
You want me to do that? Are you interested, Joe?
You have it.
All right, everyone. Good with
That's
Karen?
another wonderful appointment. Madam Chair.
Perfect. We go by consensus. All right, and we have, hired a new executive secretary. She has accepted our offer and she right now is scheduled to start March 20th. So we're very excited. Carol and I both met her and,
Yeah, she's great.
yeah, her name is Molly Pollard. Lives in Needham and has,
Where she
2 small children.
That's awesome.
What's her name?
Molly Pollard.
Any relation?
300 million.
Yeah.
So it'll be good.
Great.
I think she'll be really good. Yeah.
I think you're discussing the public school that night.
What's that?
I think you're discussing.
Yeah. Absolutely. It'll all be very confusing for everyone. Okay, so that was it.
I will not be there that night.
Any other, updates?
Go to lunch.
Finance committee members? No? All right,
Move
perfect.
to adjourn.
Second.
You're so-
All those in favor?
Aye.
It is unanimous. We stand adjourned at 8.
We're gonna miss our record keeper then.
So, if you just stay on and overlap a little bit.
Oh, you want